Hola, buenos días. Hoy vamos a hablar de los pronombres de objeto indirecto. Hello, good morning. Today we're going to talk about indirect object pronouns. By the end of this lesson, you will be able to identify the indirect object in a sentence, and you will be able to use indirect object pronouns to write and to speak. So let's begin. The first thing that we're going to talk about is defining an indirect object pronoun. Then we're going to compare indirect objects to direct objects, building off of our previous lesson. The third thing we're going to talk about is where to place indirect object pronouns. And then we will finish this lesson with a few examples and a chance for you to practice. So here's a schedule for our lesson. You can organize your notes in this order. So what is an indirect object? An indirect object complements the verb and the direct object by receiving the action of the verb and the direct object. So where a direct object simply complements the verb, an indirect object complements both the verb and the direct object. And what this means when we say it complements the verb and the direct object, what we're saying is that we're adding just another layer of detail to our sentence. And we're building off of not only the action of the sentence, but also the direct object of the sentence. So we're making sentences more exciting and dynamic. Normally, the indirect object follows the verb and the direct object. So both in English and in Spanish, you can find the indirect object after the direct object and after the verb. So let's look at a sentence here, similar to the ones that we've practiced before. In this sentence, we have a subject, yo, a verb, compro, and a direct object, los boletos. Yo compro los boletos, or I buy the tickets. Now, this is a complete sentence, but it doesn't tell us one piece of information. For whom you bought the tickets, or who received these tickets. It leaves that part of the sentence out. So if we were to modify this sentence a little bit to show who received the tickets, we would be adding an indirect object. So let's see what that looks like. So we have our same sentence from before, yo compro los boletos, but now we add an indirect object, para mis amigos. So this part of the sentence, para mis amigos, or for my friends, is adding another layer of detail to this sentence. And it's clarifying who received these tickets, or for whom the tickets were bought. So we have a subject, a verb, our direct object, and now an indirect object. So what is an indirect object pronoun? Well, just like a direct object pronoun, an indirect object pronoun takes the place of the indirect object. So for our sentence, yo compro los boletos para mis amigos, the indirect object pronoun les takes the place of para mis amigos. So our second sentence, yo les compro los boletos, means I bought the tickets for them. I buy the tickets for them. Notice that para mis amigos disappears. When we use a pronoun, it takes the place of our indirect object. So that means that we can't have both of them in the same sentence. It's one or the other. So now what you're looking at is a chart of all the indirect object pronouns. You'll notice that they're very, very similar to the direct object pronouns with the exception of our third person singular and third person plural indirect object pronouns. So take a second to copy these into your notes, because in a minute here, we're going to compare these pronouns to the direct object pronouns. Okay, so I think it's helpful to compare direct object pronouns to indirect object pronouns since we will be using both of them in a sentence pretty soon. They are very similar. In fact, they're identical in 4 of our pronouns. So me, te, nosos are the same for both types of object pronouns. The different ones are the third person singular and third person plural pronouns. Okay. So what's important to have in your notes are these two charts side by side. That way you're able to compare when you're studying both these object pronouns, which ones are used for indirect objects and which ones are used for direct objects. Okay, so where do we place indirect object pronouns? Well, the good news is it's the same syntax rules as direct object pronouns. When we have an indirect object and we'd like to replace it with a pronoun, we first have to identify if we have a simple verb or a compound verb. If it is a simple verb, we are going to put our pronoun in front of the simple verb, just like we did with direct object pronouns. If we have un verbo compuesto or a compound verb, for example, voy a comprar, I am going to buy, we have the option to put our indirect object pronoun in front of the compound verb or attached to the end of the compound verb. So our sentence, yo voy a comprar los boletos para mis amigos, can be written two ways. Number one, yo les voy a comprar los boletos. And number two, yo voy a comprarles los boletos. So now let's practice with some examples here to kind of wrap our heads around where is the indirect object and then where do we put the pronoun. So mi madre compra los boletos de ida y vuelta para mi madre. So my indirect object pronoun is here in green, and I want to replace it with an indirect object pronoun. So looking at my notes, the pronoun that takes the place of mi madre will be le, okay? But that is not where I can put the indirect object pronoun. I have a simple verb, which means that I must put the pronoun before that verb. So my sentence will look like this. Mi padre le compra los boletos. Next one. El agente de viaje explica el itinerario a nosotros. The travel agent explains the itinerary to us. A nosotros is our indirect object. I'm going to replace it with nos. But I have a simple verb, which means that I have to put it in front of that verb. El agente de viaje nos explica el itinerario. In my third example, mi hermano hace la maleta para mí. My brother packs my bag for me. Para mí is our indirect object. I have a simple verb, which means that I need to put my pronoun in front of that simple verb. So mi hermano me hace la maleta. My brother packs the bag for me. And lastly, el auxiliar da las tarjetas de embarque a mis padres. So the flight attendant gives the boarding passes to my parents. If I wanted to rewrite this using an indirect object pronoun, I would use les, and I have a simple verb, da, so I have to put my pronoun in front of that verb. El auxiliar les da las tarjetas de embarque. So now, I'd like for you to try 5 sentences on your own, and please copy these into your notebooks, copying both the original sentence and your rewritten sentence beneath it. I would also suggest to get some really good practice here to make sure that you really understand the different parts of a sentence. I suggest that you also underline the subject, the verb, the direct object, and the indirect object. So in your notebooks, I'd like to see the subject, the verb, the direct object, and the indirect object underlined and identified in the original sentence. This will help you zone in and narrow in on the indirect object that needs to be replaced. Okay? Pause the video at this point so that you can copy these sentences into your notebook and practice rewriting them. On the next slide will be the answers to these. Good luck.